So today we're going to start with this. I think is where we left off. I don't know if we made it through background information. We might, or introduction strategies. I think we did. There was one class that didn't and one class that did. I think that did I make it through the introduction don'ts? Okay. And then I probably made it through body paragraphs.
And then we stopped.
And then we got to here. And we stopped. Okay. So this is where we'll start back up in this particular class. Depending on how well our class goes, because we stopped at a different spot than the other class did, the other Tuesday, Thursday class, they stopped a little sooner. It's possible I might use both of your classes this week as the video classes for YouTube, or I might use neither. So I mean, I don't really know yet which one it's going to be. So it might be both of yours, or it might be neither of yours, and it might be the other one. I'm definitely not going to use the Monday, Wednesday because it was like, I felt like I could say the Micro Machine Man, but y'all have no idea what that was, would you?
What is it?
Once upon a time, children, there was television. And people would watch television, and you had to watch the commercials. Like, you didn't have to record. You couldn't record. You had to watch the commercials.
Yes.
Or ignore, you gotta go pee, that kind of stuff while the commercials were on. And like, you might think, well, that's easy. You just get on your phone for like 5 minutes. But there were no phones. So you would just, or you'd watch the commercials. So they tried to make them kind of entertaining. Well, there was this guy on a Micro Machines commercial. You ever heard of a Micro Machine?
Yes.
You ever heard of Hot Wheels cars?
Yes.
Well, once upon a time, they thought it'd be really cool to have tiny versions of those called Micro Machines. And they were big for like a year or two. And the Micro Machines guy, to be funny, I guess, because you ever notice how when you try to catch a fly, you can't? Have you noticed that before? You're just like, fly. Every time I try to grab at you, no matter how fast I go, you fly away. Unless it's sitting on a surface and you put your hands above it and then clap. And as it tries to fly away, you actually catch it in flight. So that's a way to catch flies, if you want. But the flies move so much faster because they're smaller, right? So they thought, well, what we'll do is, like, because they can think faster and they move their little wings so fast we can't see, we'll make the Micro Machine guy on the Micro Machine commercial talk really, really fast. And he's like, he actually, I think, has some records for like the fastest talking, because he can talk so quickly reading text, like a Guinness Book of World Records record or two. But that sounds roughly the way I've been doing the Monday, Wednesday classes right now. I've just been like every time we go to a slide. And they're like, right fast. And there might be parts near the end of this where I think that the slides aren't as important, where if you were to record like a video of the slides, it'd be much more useful than trying to write down what's there, because it's going to go by so fast there's no way you could. Additionally, the PowerPoints I've already uploaded on Blackboard, so you could look at those. I mean, does anybody know if Microsoft PowerPoint files will open if you load them into Google Office? Like, what is it, Google Office called? Google
Drive.
Drive? I guess the Drive, and then you can just upload it into Google Drive when it open in slides.
Yeah.
I've never tried it before.
I think
I could see.
You have to send it to yourself and then.
So you send it to yourself, email it to yourself, download it to your Google Drive from the Gmail, and then it might open in slides. So if you might not have PowerPoint on your computer, but likely everybody's got access to Google, and if you've got access to Google, you can get a Google Drive. And if you get a Google Drive, now my suggestion to you is, if you get a Google Drive, don't do it through your Dragon Mail account, because at one point you won't be going to school here anymore, and if you got that Dragon Mail account and all your stuff is there, then you're kind of screwed for your whole entire future. If there was anything you wanted to save, I tend to be sort of a digital pack rat, a hoarder, if you will. I've already bought like 3 like external hard drives that I have at home because I've run out of space constantly. Well, I keep all these videos, even the ones I don't put on YouTube. They take up tons of space, like 2 gigs a piece. So let's get to this. We're probably going to end up using your class because I think it's been the one that's the most fun so far, and it's the nicest pace, and it's not getting behind. So we just want to warn you. You may, if you ask a question, you might hear your voice. You won't even notice. Like, you might not hear your voice at all. We'll see. Do you have any questions about anything before we start? Oh, there's one thing I want to mention before we get going, is that you're not going to see the quiz, the reading quiz, pop up immediately after class today, and probably not immediately after class even this afternoon, because I want to make some significant changes to the quiz before I have everybody start doing it because I feel like I've said some things slightly differently this year than I generally do. And the quizzes are not, I know they're reading quizzes, but they're also, my lessons are also incorporated into it. So like the PowerPoints, that's why I was talking about the PowerPoints so much is you want to have knowledge of the PowerPoints and the things I've said in class plus the readings. So the quiz, I'm going to make some pretty significant changes and try to have it uploaded by 6 when I leave here. If I don't have it uploaded by this evening, then I'm gonna definitely extend the deadline because that's taking away like a whole day you could do it. So I would extend the deadline. It would be Monday or something, but I'm not promising that yet. Don't say like, Nichols, I got on there and it wasn't open until Monday. It's like, yeah, I got it on there like at 4 p.m. on Thursday. You're like, yeah, but I really wanted you to do that. Yes.
It just comes up on your phone.
It comes up. Oh, it just comes up on your phone, like without even.
On Blackboard, you just click here. And
You click and it just pops up and you don't even have to make any
still in
changes.
Blackboard.
And now that is an Apple phone, so I don't know if that'll work on a phone that has its basis in Android the same way. Yes.
It works the same way on Android. They pop
Boom.
up.
So PowerPoints just pop up. Apparently,
Sweet.
whatever browser you've got, it just knows how to read it. So that's good. Granted, I prefer to use it on a computer.
I don't think you
They're
can take-
bigger that way.
Yeah, I don't think you can take quizzes on the phones.
Oh, you can't take quizzes on the phones? Everybody? You can? Okay. Whoa.
Everyone.
Karen, don't make everybody panic. They're like, I know if I can't do quizzes on phones, I quit the class. A lot of people are like, I'm jumping shit. Like, I wanted to ask real quick before we got moving. So the reading quizzes, it might not be open immediately after school, but I will be open later. And then if it does take me until like way late this evening, like past 9, to get it posted, or tomorrow, then I'll definitely keep it open until Monday, I guess.
How many questions will be on the reading quiz?
Somewhere between 10 and 20. That's the problem I was having, is I didn't know whether I wanted to add questions that cover stuff that I've added, or if I want to take away questions that are existing. So it's either going to be 10 or 20. I may end up adding. And if I do add, I'll end up making the time limit not 30 minutes, but an hour. So that you have more time to deal with that.
Sweet.
Any other questions about that stuff? Any stuff in the course you've seen so far? Did I ever mention the English 1301 labs? I kind of want to go and show you real quick. Because if you're on Blackboard and you look, and I've got 1302 pulled up, but if I log, I'll go to his Magnus Baraka. It's easier to do it that way. So if you go log into your accounts, by the way, I would suggest that if there's some people who have not done this yet, haven't logged in, please log in. Because there's been a number of students I've had email me saying they have Blackboard issues where like they're putting their student ID in correctly, they're putting their password in correctly, but when they go in, or it doesn't let them in. Like it says, sorry, this is not like correct. So you need to maybe just at least log in and try first, so that if you had to email helpdesk@parisjc.edu, then you could, and know that you would need to do that before the first paper is due or the quiz. So here's our course, and once you get in there, if you go down to, I know we've talked about syllabus, quizzes, assignments, that's where the essay is, but English 1301 lab, this might sound a little confusing, but I've been doing this for a long time with the English 1302 students, and they haven't said it's confusing, but the English 1301 labs, by the way, any 1301 teacher has to have these, so there's a lot of these little exercises, see? Technically speaking, I'm only grading you on the graded lab quiz. So when you get, like, the very last thing you'll see is a graded lab quiz. You're welcome to if you want to. My suggestion would be if you think that you've already got some of this. It's a lot of it like grammar, structure, like thesis, basic kind of stuff. If you felt like you're familiar with the 5-paragraph format and introductions, conclusions, body paragraphs, and you're like, I think I could do this. Then you could just click the practice quiz, see how you do, and then do the graded quiz. Although I've had some students and they just sat down and said, I know this stuff. And they did all the graded quizzes in like 3 hours and did fine. So I mean, it's up to you whether you want to spend the time looking at the whole lessons, or you want to jump straight to the practice quizzes and then to the lab quizzes, or if you want to just do the lab quizzes. But there's no like time limit. The only time that you have to have them all done by week 13, day 1, which is the day before Thanksgiving. So it'd be good not to put a whole bunch of stuff on yourself that exact time. But if you want to, you can leave it all till that particular week. Like you're like, Thanksgiving week, yeah. Oh, and by the way, I should mention, I'm assuming every one of your schools has a full week off at Thanksgiving. We don't. That Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, we come, and they run your buses. Just FYI. I know they run the Quinlan bus. I don't know about the Lonoke bus. Lonoke bus, I think they do, but I feel like it's better to not surprise somebody with a disappointment like the day before it happens. It's better to prepare people for that disappointment far in advance. We do. As far as I know, every year that there's been this question of, are we going to require them to come? The answer has always been yes. Otherwise, I think it's because our college has certain requirements for how many times we have to have students meet. If we didn't have you meet, then we would get in trouble with our accrediting body, basically. Happy Thanksgiving. What? Christmas, you get out a little early.
Okay.
I think compared to your school, maybe. It's a long break, so compared, I think, to public school. So I believe that from December 14th all the way to something like January 22nd, or maybe January 9th. It's one of those two. But you get a week and a half or 2 weeks off at Christmas at your school?
We get 2 weeks.
2 weeks, then you generally would get at least 1 week longer off from college. So you get more, you miss that day at Thanksgiving break, but you're going to get a couple extra days at Christmas. Granted, you'll still have to go back to your public school, but you wanted to start college classes immediately. So those of you watching the video later, these are students who are simultaneously enrolled in high school. So you're like, I don't get what is this public school break? They're doing both at the same time. That's why I'm explaining that. Additionally, if I haven't mentioned it before, PowerPoint's here, lesson videos here. I don't think I've shown you since I've actually added the lesson videos, but there are some on there now. So if we click lesson videos, it goes to a link to the YouTube playlist. And then that opens, and then you can see there's the first class on the syllabus, and then the next one is invention, arrangement, and then the assignment of the essay. And when you click it, it just starts, and it starts on this title slide, so you can see roughly what the class is about. I didn't mention this to the new students, but when I say it's recording the class, it's only recording. You'll hear me talking over it, and then it'll start the lesson and stuff. And you can skip through to the stuff you need, of course, because it's YouTube. You just have to hope it loads. So I'm logging as Magnus Baraka, and you can see how I'm assigning the essay, all that kind of stuff. So let's go back to the lessons that we were at here.
Why do you sign in as somebody else?
Just so I always know what it looks like as a student. I have Magnus Baraka set up as a student, and so a lot of times I'll get on as a teacher, and I'll be like, oh, they can see this, but then I'm not realizing, oh, this is not literally what they see. And so I like to see exactly what you see. So that's why I have a fake student set up. So if you ever get on in a future semester, we have discussion posts online where you talk to other students. If you ever see a Magnus Baraka, don't talk to him. He's fake. And I will not respond. Is there anybody in this class who did not receive one of these info sheets? Is there anybody who has info sheets they need to turn in? Because I wanted to do that one more time. Is that here? I just saw that. I wanted to grab them. Anybody else? Anybody else? Last call today. I mean, you can bring it to me after class if you need to. Okay. So let's talk about what are good types of support to help prove the thesis. And I think it does help to briefly go over what we've been talking about. So, I didn't put the thing in. A little USB radio type communicator thing. Go backwards. So we got done talking about the introduction and things that I thought were good strategies, at least for me. I mean, some teachers might love the quotes later. Some people might love you to start with a definition. They might require you to. Just do whatever that teacher is asking of you. Now, I think that these are generally good strategies because I think for the most part they're universal for everyone. There might be somebody who hates when you start with a question and says never do it. Somebody who might say, unless they say I require you to start with a question. I mean, I don't see who would. If reading two essays, one side by side, one starts with a question, one doesn't, that they would go, you know what, I prefer the one with the question. Because otherwise, where are they going? I don't know, I just don't know many people who read good writing. And then I've had the stuff not doing the instructions. Then we talk about body paragraphs, and so the idea from here is in the paragraphs is you have supporting sentences that are all meant to support the thesis. What types of support should you provide? And that's where we stop. This is not just support for narrative essays. This is support for all different types of essays in body paragraphs. So there are examples, reasons, facts, statistics, details, expert opinions, personal experiences, and visuals. Just briefly, I can tell you that in this paper, personal experiences, of course, narrative essay, that's going to be like the #1 thing you're using because it's all going to be personal experience. In addition, those personal experiences will need to contain some pretty good detail. You'll have to have that there as well. You'll need to contain like a little bit of facts about, the time, the place, the date, the location, those sorts of things. To what degree you need to provide those. You don't need to do time, place, date, location, or wait, place and location, the same. Time, date, location, every single moment of the story. So it doesn't need to feel like an episode of Law and Order. Did I mention that the other day? Yeah. So you don't want to make it feel like some sort of criminal investigation television show where you're 2, 3, as long as it's got enough of the facts that we need to get going. But there are other things that will be used as well in different papers. And you could kind of argue that you're an expert opinion, like you're the expert on yourself. So your personal experiences are being funneled through your expert opinion on who you are. But with the thesis that we have, how you've gathered something, from this experience, one other thing you'll have to provide right near the end of the paper is examples. You'll have to provide an example of how you've changed from the experience. And that's what I tell you, everybody forgets to do. So even in the narrative essay, we're doing at least 4 of these things. If you're doing the paper where, I'm not laughing about this, but if you're doing the paper where like it's the death of a loved one, then you're wanting somebody to know that you loved your loved one, like if your grandma was important to you. So you've got to basically not only provide examples, but also you have to basically say there are reasons that you love this person, and then provide examples for that. So like the reasons are going to come into play as well. The only thing I can think that would not at all make a play, and when I say reasons and examples, you're saying my grandmother, really loved me and always took care of me growing up. Like there was a time when she, I got hurt, my parents couldn't make it, and she raced there, and I don't even know how she got there that fast. That would be a reason with an example. So the only thing I can see that you wouldn't be using necessarily would be statistics and visuals. Just about everything else. And if you want to say expert opinion, that you're the expert on yourself, you're not using outside experts, but for the most part, you're using almost everything, and you will in most papers use almost all the different types of stuff. Except from here on, this is the last paper you'll use personal experiences. You won't use those ever again in this class. So examples are good because often they will accompany reasons. You give a reason why somebody should think the thing, and you provide examples showing that reason is the case. You're using logic for the reason, you're using examples to show proof of that reason, which I already kind of talked about and gave an example for me. Was that example good enough that I gave before, like on the narrative essay? Why is it bad that grandma died? I loved her and she loved me. Well, what's an example that proves that? I mean, you show an example, like, she always came to help me in my time of need. Facts, I feel like in any type of paper as well, those can be useful. Even outside our paper, you're gonna have to provide, like I think the sample research paper that we have later in the class, like a student says, he's reading all these papers about physician-assisted suicide and whether it should be legal, and they all shorten it to PAS. So he does use PAS throughout his paper, but he realizes that for the reader, he's got to provide a few facts about what physician-assisted suicide is, because if I say that, does everybody know what that is? You can kind of guess what it might be, right? A physician assists with suicide, but just the way it sounds as a phrase. And then if I say PAS, nobody knows. So he knows he has to start by saying physician-assisted suicide. Then later, after he's established that, he can shorten it to PAS. He's got to provide those facts first before he can move on. And then that's going to be extremely useful too in like cause-effect, comparison, contrast. Statistics, I really don't want anybody to, if you use statistics in this particular paper, you would have to cite them because statistics don't just come from the air, you have to find them somewhere. If you were to use that, did I use the example of like, if you were doing a paper on like the surprising statement, you would be like, suicide is now the leading cause of death among teenagers. If you did that, you would have to find that and then cite that. So to use a statistic in your paper, and by the way, I would apologize, it's just the way I talk, I guess, but sometimes I will accidentally say statistic, or statistics. So just I try to enunciate, but sometimes that particular word gives me a problem. So statistics, if you do use them, you will have to cite them. So keep that in mind. Even on a paper where we haven't learned it yet, I'll be like, okay, good that you use a statistic. You have two options. One, remove it. Or two, tell me where you got it from and then cite that. And I'll help you with that. Or you can wait to revise it until after we've learned how to cite things. Then you go back and you do it. See? It's an easy way. Details, of course, details, you're going to have to provide support using details. Expert opinions, the other type of expert opinions are, like later when we're doing the research paper, if you're writing a paper about physician-assisted suicide, you're going to want to have people who've studied this, people who've, written about it at length, people who have that as part of their jobs. Preferably somebody who oversees a number, if somebody studies something all the time, I would consider that person to be an expert. I wouldn't even consider myself to be an expert on English classrooms. I would consider myself to be an expert on English classrooms at small rural community colleges in middle northeast Texas as a male, maybe. But even then, I don't think I'm an expert on all the colleges. Basically, I'm just an expert in this one classroom, this one college. So that's all I really truly know. There might be some things that I agree with some of my colleagues from different parts of the country, but there are different concerns from place to place. So just because you do a thing, you're like, I work at Sonic, therefore I'm an expert at Sonic. No, you're an expert at that Sonic in that one job you do. When you become a manager, you probably are an expert at the job you did and some of the other jobs that you're managing, because you have to know those jobs to tell people what to do. But oftentimes, once you've been a manager for a while, then you forget how to actually do the job, and then you don't become an expert anymore. So it always depends. But if somebody puts their whole life towards studying something, like somebody who's an academic, somebody who has a PhD and they're studying astrophysics at a college, all they have to do really is publish. That's their whole job. They have to make sure that they study, produce those studies, and publish them, and add to the scholarship. So that's literally all they do all the time. In fact, that's probably, in most cases, going to be the least politically motivated stuff, because nobody's paying for those studies to be done. Just taxpayers are, and with taxpayer money, nobody knows what each person who donated that money wants out of it. So so a lot of times the best people you can trust are those who don't have any other outside motivating factors, and those people I would consider experts. One person you can't consider an expert, who often would seem like it, would be do you have family who watches MSNBC, CNBC, Fox News, those type of channels? Those people on those channels generally not actually experts. And I'm talking about liberal side, Republican side, or liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. The reason is because these are people who are really fighting for advertising dollars. They have to say more sensational stuff. They want to sell money for commercials and things. Because of that, they have to make things sound more dire than they are. Additionally, the experts they call on, you don't get to read something that they've published at length. You hear just a couple of well-placed questions that get the information out of them that they want. So sometimes they might even, Fox News might call a liberal on there, but only ask them certain questions to where they get the answers that they want. And the same on MSNBC. They may call on a conservative person, and then they only ask them a certain few questions that are meant to really make the other side kind of look like an idiot. And also, these people are journalists. They're not experts in anything except being a journalist, which we often will sometimes try to say, what was the example? I think it was an example, maybe a book, it says, maybe Dan Rather does a news story. Is Dan Rather still a news person? Who's a news person people know? Who's
Clarice Tinsley.
Clarice Tinsley? No, Clarice Tinsley, who I believe has an honorary master's, doesn't she? From Boston College or something. But that's not a real master's. But it's not. Somebody gives you an honorary thing that's just good job, we think you deserve something. It's an award. But if Clarice Tinsley gets on and She's not even really a great example because she's always reporting on social media, right?
Yeah.
She's like, let's look at what somebody said on Facebook, and I'm like, why is this news? Let's say we have somebody like who's like Brian Williams. Is he still a person?
Ron
Does he?
Burgundy.
No, a real person.
Or
You talking about the Daily Show guy? Or the Daily Show?
I just know his name. Something Tucker.
Stephen Colbert.
Stephen Colbert?
We
Yeah,
don't
he was a
watch the
fake one too.
news.
The big
Because I only know I know Brian Williams. I don't watch a lot of the TV news because I don't want to be swayed by journalists wanting me to think a certain thing. So I'll watch more news. But let's just say we have Brian Williams, and Brian Williams is asking somebody about their experience in the war, or they're reporting on some war story. That doesn't make him an expert in war. It makes him an expert journalist. So you have to be aware of who's saying what their credentials are, and those sorts of things before you count them as an expert. In this case, you're an expert on yourself, but still, even your parents could be partly experts on you as well. Now, personal experiences, like I said, have to use it for this, but probably not afterwards, because I don't really need your personal experience on a cause-effect essay, even though that cause-effect essay could be about Facebook, or Snapchat, I think, or Instagram. A lot of people, they want to go, oh, I know this, and they'll start throwing their personal experiences in, but the paper doesn't want personal experiences, so it actually ends up messing your paper up rather than helping you, because it wants an objective approach. Now, visuals, I only put this here because the book has it. I don't want you to include visuals in papers. I don't think if there's anything, to me, visuals for the most part are like, you can't think of a way to say it in words, so you include a visual. And a lot of times visuals are just meant to make people think emotionally about something. Like if you're writing a paper about like how unfair generally across the country the police are to people of color or minorities, whatever phrase you prefer, and you're like, I want to provide a visual, and somehow you were able to provide like a video in your paper of like somebody having interaction with police that didn't go very well. I mean, that technically is just one situation. That doesn't mean that all the situations are like that. So it'd be much better to provide like statistics of that particular way that they're treated rather than one particular video instance. So you need to gather statistics, which are always going to be better, I think, than a visual. And the only kinds of visuals that I tend to prefer are like visuals of statistics. It's like bar graphs and charts, but you can just do that with words. One of the main reasons I started, I already knew I wouldn't like visuals, but one semester I had a student really petition hard. He said, Nichols, I really think that I could do a lot better on this paper if I'm allowed to include visuals. And I said, I might let you be like the test case. I'll let you try. And he's like, okay, cool. And so he wrote his research paper about the legalization of marijuana. And in the paper, he ended up including one visual, and it was like your heading, and then like the title, legalization of marijuana, and then there was a cartoon picture of a pot leaf, and then the essay started. And I was like, and all of my suspicions were confirmed, no visuals. I don't know anybody out there who's like, on the fence. They're like, what, I don't know if we should legalize marijuana. I don't know how to feel about it. I'm not sure. And then they open up that essay and they start reading, and they see the picture of the cartoon pot leaf. They're like, that's it? Well, I didn't realize it looks so simple and harmless. Well, legalize it. I don't know one person out there who would just make a decision based on a cartoon pot leaf. So it's possible with the people we have in this world, I guess. But to me, visuals, they're just usually going to do more harm than they're going to do help. Any questions about these things? Once you feel like I didn't explain far enough and you want one more example of how examples are good, you want more reasons as to why reasons should be used, you want some statistics on how useful statistics are, you want some facts about what facts are, more detail on details. Yes?
I have a question about revising our essays.
Yes.
Can we revise it past the due date, or does it have to be completely revised and finished by the due date?
Oh yeah, I mean, I will be grading it after the due date. So you can definitely revise it past the due date. You're welcome to as well. I've had students who, if you turn in a paper and you're not happy with that first submission you made, you're like, oh crap, I need to revise this before he even grades it. You can revise that. And then I'll just see that you had 2 attempts, and what I'll do is I'll make this little message that says, I'm putting a 0 on this first attempt just to get rid of it, but I'm going to grade the second one. And so I'll just end up grading whatever your most recent one is. And do keep that in mind. I've had some people will say, oh, I forgot a title, and they'll just literally submit like a document with a title on it and not the paper. And then I'm like, I've already graded the other one a 0, and they're going to go back and grade the other one. And then be like, I guess I assume that this title's here, and that just irritates me. So, and then I probably end up dragging the grade down in some unforeseen way, you know. But I don't know for sure. But revisions can happen way after the date, and there's no limitation on revisions. If for some reason you feel like it takes you 10 revisions to get the grades you want, do 10 revisions. But you're not just limited to like 1. You can do multiple. I think I kind of tried to overkill your questions. I think you asked like one little simple question. I was like, here's all the answers. I provided lots and lots of details and facts that were further than what was asked, which I think helped explain the question even further. So, any more questions like that? Y'all can always stop for any kind of those questions too. Because like I'm not talking about revision, but to ask about revision, that was the only time she's like, oh, if I hold on to this, then maybe I won't, you know. So then we ask it, boom, then we get the answer. And everybody wanted to know that, right? I imagine there's a bunch of people in the room. I forgot I wanted to know that, but yes, like I totally should have asked that earlier, or later. You know, always feel free to do that. I always tell students that, but something, I don't know if it's the way I talk, but sometimes I feel people like, can I say something? Yes.
Tuesday?
Yes.
That's when we're doing like the in-class?
Yes. Tuesday we are doing our like in class, the first day where we're talking about what it is that we hate about group projects.
What we hate.
Oh yeah. We're talking about what we hate about group projects. What we think is terrible. Then we may, by the end of that class, actually get into our first groups once we've figured out the logic behind like how groups should be formed. We may not. We'll probably try to leave a little bit of time too to talk about narrative essay concerns for those people who are about to turn those in. So I'll probably like in the last 15 minutes maybe have some time for questions. And if it doesn't, we'll just end up doing more group stuff if people don't have any questions. I might actually show you how to submit, where to go to submit, and that kind of thing. That might help. But yeah, for that, we're going to be talking about what we hate about group projects for our group project. It's going to be fun. Well, I can't promise that. It's going to be something. I can't even promise that. I mean, we might get in here and we find out, oh, this is boring. I don't know. Wait, I don't know. That we might hate.
Wait, so
Then we'll have to talk about what we hate about talking about what we hate about group projects. Let's move on to effective support. So when you provide any kind of examples, reasons, facts, statistics, details, expert opinions, personal experiences, visuals, you know, any of that support should be relevant, specific, adequate, representative, and documented. Yes?
I have a question about the group thing.
Yes.
Do you know how many people we're going to have in a group?
That's one thing we're going to determine. I know that it's not going to be as low as 2.
Not as low. What about one?
Because the one problem I have is that I'm thinking, no, not 15. I'm assuming that anybody who's doing anybody in the industry who wants to see how you work in groups, for the most part, these are going to be projects where they want the groups to be somewhere between 3 and I'm assuming 6. But we're going to talk about whether we want them to be closer to 3 or closer to 6. And my assumption is the lazy people think groups of 6 are fine. The dedicated people don't want that. That would just be a guess that I have. I'd be like, I could just disappear into this 6-person group and not do a dang thing. We're gonna talk. We don't. So yeah, it could be. It's not as low as 2, but definitely not something super high. Probably not any higher than 6. That'll be some of the stuff we get to talk about. Wasn't that exciting? Little preview. You're like, no. It wasn't. So we need our support to be relevant, specific, adequate, representative, and documented. When we're talking relevancy, make sure that all your support actually helps make your case. It shouldn't just exist because you wanted to fit it in. I feel like I told the story of the guy on the four-wheeling guy, right? Who talked about being drunk.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what I was talking about it for, but it also works here with relevancy. He just really wanted to fit that story in about a fun time he had with his friends.
Oh, about
Yeah, like he got complete. It was an off topic. I was talking good. So I did find a decent spot for it. And so yeah, he totally wandered kind of off topic, but he started by wandering, and he provided some completely irrelevant detail because it was about a time when he got drunk and didn't get injured. Later, he talked about how he was sober and got injured, so he really didn't even need the whole like drunk episode because it was a completely different experience on a different night. So make sure that everything you include is relevant to the topic at hand. Don't talk about how like, oh, my best friend is so important to me. I love my best friend, and then your grandma dies. Additionally, I had a paper one time where a girl was like, yeah, my grandfather, he had Alzheimer's and it was getting worse and worse, and we were really worried about it. And you know, pretty soon Alzheimer's was going to take his life, we thought. And then we go to the next page, and it said, he died in an unrelated house fire that he didn't start. I was like, what? Like it was like Alzheimer's is taking him away from us, and then all of a sudden, boom, house fire. And I was like, so the Alzheimer's thing, though it was true about their grandfather, ended up being completely irrelevant to the way in which he died. Like it was, you know, like you'd think, they consider that to be an Alzheimer's death if you start a fire with Alzheimer's, because like say you start cooking and then you go over here and forget you're cooking and then it starts a fire. Like that's considered death by like Alzheimer's. But it was like wiring in the wall caught fire. So it wasn't anything he even did. So I was like, the Alzheimer's ended up becoming completely irrelevant to the story. And really the fire was more irrelevant, because if you're talking about Alzheimer's, how he was leaving you, and now you just kind of leave out the fact that the fire was what, like he ended up, you know, dying sometime later, and like it was sad. Like you could just go move on to that and not say how. I don't know, it's very strange, like the way that they tried to make that irrelevant detail relevant. You want to be specific as what we detail with explanation examples, not general and vague. It's one of the reasons I'm asking you to like explain how the loved one was close to you. Because I don't like it when people deal too much in generalities, and that's the trick, is figuring out what's the right amount of detail to include, what's too much.
So that one girl was too specific with the house fire?
I wouldn't say that she was too specific, she was off topic there. But if we go back to another example I gave from the book, remember the girl with the baseball essay? And like she wanted to play professional baseball, but then she got talking about hot dogs?
Oh yeah.
Way too specific on hot dogs. So you want to be specific about the stuff in here, but you don't want to be too specific. And it's a difficult kind of balance to give us, because you want to have specificity. Which is why I'm asking you too, like when you say, you know, I learned to live life to the fullest, I want you to be specific about how you've learned to live life to the fullest. And if you're not specific, you're like, oh, you know, I do more stuff with family. What stuff? Stuff. You know? I want not general words like stuff. I want like specifics and like how you've done it. And then it has to be adequate. Don't give a taste of the full support and then fall short of delivering the full effect. Like a lot of times I will, you know, get somebody who says like, my grandma was really important to me. She always helped me a lot of times in life. And I'm like, really? Like what? Just like times. And then like I don't get anything about those times, you know, so that's inadequate to me. So it's not only not specific, it's also inadequate. You want to be representative as well, and this ends up, all three of these work a little bit better later in the course when we're not doing narrative essay, but you have to provide enough information to help prove your point. That's what adequacy is. So you've got to have the right amount. Later, I think I asked for people to provide solutions on some, like if you think that something's causing a problem in the world, you know, and I don't ask you for the effects, I just say, what is the cause of this problem and what are some solutions? And people end up giving me a whole paper full of multiple causes, and they give me one solution. But the paper asks for multiple solutions, and I end up getting like one. That's inadequate. So you got to give enough of what's being asked for. Representative, don't pretend as though something that applies in only very few situations is more important than it actually is. So I had a student, she wrote a paper on legalization of marijuana. There were like 4 papers she cited about how it should be legalized, 1 it shouldn't, and she ended up writing about how it shouldn't. And I was like, that's weird that you chose that research. And she was like, well, I couldn't find research that said that it should be, or shouldn't be. And I was like, well, then what made you decide that it shouldn't be? She said, and then she told this personal story about how once she was living in an apartment complex and somebody who smoked pot downstairs started a fire. We don't even know if it was from the pot. And that fire burnt up the building, and she had to go from like apartment to apartment, knocking on doors, helping save people. And to her mind, everybody who's ever smoked pot burns down apartment complexes. Like, you could not convince her. And I was like, what do people with cigarettes? And she was like, but they don't. You could tell, like, she just literally thought, like, they don't burn down places. Because it was her personal experience, it was kind of invading. But so she was acting like that one pot smoker represented all pot smokers. And we have to be very aware of that with our personal experiences, that that's not how it is. Your personal experiences will definitely affect how you think about everything in this world. But the problem is, you need to be aware when the effect that it's having is either negative or based on too little information. Like, is every single person in this experience experiencing the same thing that you are, or are you just in that particular experience? And so you have to recognize when that one experience is not good enough, or even a few, because it's not representative. Additionally, you want to make sure, not on this paper, but you got to make sure that you document things. So you can kind of even get past essay 2 without documenting, but on essay 3 we have to start documenting. You have to say, like, this is where I got the news story, and this is where I'm using it in the paper. Because I actually do have used news stories in that particular paper. And then, like, later with the research paper, like, this is where this document was found, this document, this document, this document. Here's how I found this information, this information. You'll have to do that later. Now, I did have one paper that I had a really great writer one time. So, oh no, this is one story I'm telling. So I've had many great writers. But this is a student who wrote a research paper about homeschooling and its effect on going into college and, like, your success in college. And she wrote that her thesis was like, students should pursue homeschool because students who come from a homeschool background are 15% more likely to move on from their freshman to their sophomore year of college. And I was like, good, that's big, like, that's a big number. And now personally, and I'm sure that, well, I don't know, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Y'all heard that before? Mm-hmm. A lot of people tell me, like, oh, you have bias because you're an educator. Well, I mean, I became an educator because I thought education was important. I wouldn't have just I didn't just fall into education. I knew that from the time that I was young that I wanted to be an educator. I don't have any family who's an educator, so that wasn't from that kind of bias. Well, I mean, my aunt is. My other aunt is. My parents aren't. I don't know. But I go to church with people who homeschool their kids. And so I have value in public education, personal value, that I think public education is a value to society. And there's people I've gone to church with over the years who they homeschooled their kids, and students have come to us, to the college, who came from a homeschool background. And sometimes those kids just turn out weird, and they seem not to know as much as other people. And I recognize that that's a problem that could be particular to my church, because in any given semester here at PJC, my best students generally come from a homeschool background. So I recognize that there's that dichotomy. No. It's kind of like a polarization. No. Like things on opposite ends. I shouldn't look up the definition for you. But dichotomy, it's like two things that are opposed to each other.
Division or contrast between two things that are...
Is that dictionary.com?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not looking at that. Dichotomy. Did you spell it right on your first try?
Yeah. D-I-C-H-T-O-N.
Yeah.
T. It was right whenever I was typing it. It's basically what you said. A difference between two opposite things, a division into two opposite groups. I will always cite from the Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary until they give me an Oxford app, and then I can get for free, and then I will use the Oxford and the Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. I will use two definitions. But that dichotomy, that division between the two things, that very wide chasm between the two things, I realized that I have great students that come from a homeschool background and seem really good with people, and I realized that I've had people who I know from church who they seem to have learned nothing in their entire homeschool and don't know how to talk to people. And I'm like, where's the problem here? Like, how do we bridge that gap? And like, what's the right answer? And so when she wrote this paper with 15% more likely to move on from freshman to sophomore year, I was like, that's pretty significant. And so because of my natural interest in it, I looked into that paper in more detail and was kind of disappointed in what I found. So on this paper, there were 5 pieces of research. One was like a letter to the editor for a newspaper. Now, those people aren't experts. That's like, you could write a letter to the editor. You're like, yeah, I don't write a letter to the editor about Trump. It doesn't make you a political expert. It just makes you writing a letter to the editor. And then they'll publish it because they're like, ooh, people are reading our paper in the community. And then they put it on the thing.
Yeah.
So that's, one of those things that happen. Sometimes you do get an expert, sometimes you don't. So it just depends. But that was her one article she was arguing against. And the 4 articles that were supporting her idea, one, this guy, was merely talking about the studies done by this guy, she had 3 different studies that were all from the same guy, 3 different articles. And in these 3 different articles, he was referencing the exact same study 3 different times and just talking about it in slightly different ways. So really we're talking one study was done. I'll pull that back down when it's relevant. Does that scare the crap out of everybody when it happens?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've noticed, I'm not really I don't get like jump scared. I just kind of was like, annoying. But unless I'm anticipating something, like if I think my wife's around the corner and I look around the corner and she is, then for some reason I get really scared. Like it's like if I know it's coming, I get more scared. It's very strange. So this girl, she's writing this paper and it's like 3 different articles written about the exact same study. So I looked into the study that he was writing about. The study was about a small Catholic liberal arts college in like Massachusetts, I think. That had about 2,000 students. By the way, PJC has 4,500 students, or no, almost 5,000 students this semester. So it's even smaller than PJC. And it was private school as well. Like it's not a public school, small Catholic liberal arts college. And of those 2,000 students, 100 students were used in the study, and of those 100 students, 15 were homeschooled. So this girl was basically telling me that these 15 students were enough, that they were an adequate number of students to figure out whether or not it's better to be homeschooled, that they were representative of all students in the country. I mean, I'm a Christian, but I'm not Catholic. So I'm like, does that mean that Catholic people would necessarily perform better or non-Catholic people would perform? Like, I don't know. So, that's already not representative. And then, like, they're from the Northeast and I'm from Texas. So all kinds of different things factor in. It's not representative necessarily. And it is documented, but her documentation didn't really spread further than, like, basically that one guy. So I felt like all of those things were lacking. And I felt really bad because she was a really good student who actually, I think, had come from a homeschool background. But so I told her, I said, listen, I felt really bad because all of her other papers have been really good, and I'm giving her like a 60 or something on this paper because it was just like the proof she was trying to use did not prove. And I was like, so sorry, but I was like, this is what I saw. You really need to have documentation, like you have articles from multiple different writers, and I would prefer that you have even the person you're writing against also have written an intelligent article, not be some like easy target. Additionally, I need more studies. I need more that would work. And now here's the thing, the crazy thing is she'd already done that research and she ended up discarding it because of a reason I'll tell you. So what she ended up doing was she changed the paper where this time she had 6 sources instead of 5. She still wanted to include that guy who, by the way, I forgot to mention the guy who did the study at the Catholic Liberal Arts College. He got his PhD from a seminary school. So he got a preaching degree. And had no background in education whatsoever. So he was a guy writing articles about something he wasn't an expert in. So he who knows if his methodology was correct. But she really wanted to include him. So she included this guy and a guy who wrote an intelligent article about the other side. And then she included, it was a study, I think, of a university in Washington, a community college in California, a community college in Texas, and a university in Florida. So now we're like all around the country. Tens of thousands of students, maybe even 100,000 or so students. that were used in her estimation. When she averaged them all together, now her thesis, instead of saying 15% more likely, said 2.5% more likely. And I was like, whoa, really? 2.5% more likely? That was really impressive. And she was like, it's way lower than 15. And I was like, yes, but it's based on a much bigger number. So it's way more statistically relevant. Like that, if 15% more likely with 15 students, there's no way I would know that that's even correct. But 2.5% based on like hundreds of thousands of students, that I can trust a little bit more. And very well, granted, that probably still is subject to the idea that she's picking out the studies that show the more positive attributes for her. But it looked a lot better, and it felt like it was adequate, represented, and documented based on what she showed me the second time. So all of these things sort of come together to help out. So keep that in mind for the future. Transitions, and I'm probably going to go into the rest of the slides fairly quickly. It might even be better to look it up later on the PowerPoint and take notes off that if you wanted to on Blackboard. But every chapter is going to have a box of transition words for that particular style of writing. So just locate those and know where they are to kind of help add some variability and some variation, it's basically the same word, to your papers. All body paragraphs should follow a particular pattern of development. So when you're doing narrative, you've got to do like chronological order because that's what narrative development is. Each body paragraph should clearly support the thesis statement. Make sure every time you're going forward, it's really better if you start writing your narrative. Before you start writing your narrative, you already know what you gathered from the experience. If you start writing without knowing that, it's going to be very clear the whole time that you just sort of tack it on at the end. I'll be like, they didn't know, they had no idea, they just wrote the story and went, crap, what did I learn? Oh, done. And then I can just tell what I'm reading. So you gotta, each body paragraph should clearly support the thesis statement as you go. Once we've gone through intro, body paragraphs, now we're at the conclusion. Conclusions can end in a few different ways. Please do not, well, I've said this in the next slide, so I'm not gonna get ahead of myself. You want to review key points and state thesis. That's something that you're gonna have to do. You don't have to rewrite the exact wording of the thesis, but you can be close. Some things you can do, you could recommend a course of action, give some sort of prediction. I think those are the good ones. Again, relevant quotation, I put it on there because it's in the book. Not necessarily because I think it's a good idea. We've already had our whole quotation discussion. But recommended course of action is where, like, specifically if somebody's, like, let's say, I think they just had something that happened on, do you know that there was a congressional hearing on artificial intelligence the other day? Of course you don't. In fact, not many people I know would know that, but there was. And they basically signed a bunch of stuff or made a commitment to moving forward with. Some states, I think, now actually have tax burdens or barriers in place for if you want to like have self-driving cars in a state, and they basically took those away. They said like we're going to make legislation that says that states can't keep self-driving cars out of their states because I think it's that important. Because they'd really prefer if none of you ever drove. So would I. People suck at driving. That's how people die. That's why they just, did y'all know the texting law just passed? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're like, yes, like that's the one news I've been following. Can't do that anymore. Of course I never did, but I'm talking from your perspective, not mine. So the recommending a course of action, they essentially had this congressional hearing and then they recommended that what they should do moving forward is they should release the barriers to artificial intelligence and specifically self-driving cars in all kinds of states. Because that was the course of action. Now, not always are you going to be in a situation where you can change the course of things, but you could perhaps in your paper imply that some particular course of action should be made. If you're writing a paper on legalization of marijuana, I don't want you to say, we should move forward, because that's, getting second person and the reader involved. You should say it's important that America move forward on legislation that opens the possibilities for more research into marijuana for the possible benefits they could have or something like that. Now with prediction, you could do the same thing with self-driving cars. Oftentimes a prediction could be a doomy, like oh no, gloomy prediction, where you're like, it's hard to know exactly how many people will die as a result of fights against artificial intelligence legislation that limits self-driving cars' ability to save lives. but it's something that no one would want to find out. That's kind of a vague prediction. I think that those are two good possibilities, because basically with an introduction, you're trying to grab a reader and tell the information they need to know. I always think of it like you're hooking a fish. So you got the hook in the water with the bait, and the fish goes, awesome, and then he gets on there and he's like, oh, this sucks. And he's grabbed, and he's got to listen, he's got to like be there looking at, okay, I got to take this in. There's some dude, he's caught me, he's in a boat. It looks like that from the bottom, I got to remember all this. And then like at the end, the fisherman, he's like, all right, little fish, go back to the water, because he throws him back. And he puts him back in the water. And the fish basically is like going back out in the world going, okay, now that I know all this stuff about what could happen if I go toward one of these hook and baits again, now I know how to approach the world. So it's kind of like, I think that when you're introducing to somebody, you're introducing them to the information they need to go to get into it. When you're concluding, you're letting them know the things they need to know as they're going away from you. Like they're going to be leaving your site, and so you need to let them know the things they need to know to help this be impactful on them. Relevant quotation, please don't. I don't want people to end by repeating the exact same words of their thesis, so don't like literally write the thesis verbatim in the conclusion again, or even the exact wording of most of your introduction. Please don't do that. Don't end with cliche. You know what cliche is, right? It's a phrase that's overused. And people think that it helps people understand better, but if I say to you, they're like, is he a nice guy? Well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And people are like, what? What apple? Like, no, it's a phrase. He's a lot like his father. Why didn't you just say that? I was trying to make it, you to understand by talking about an apple. It doesn't. Cliches don't make a lot of sense. Even like phrases that aren't like that, like where it's not the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but using a phrase like, I learned to live life to the fullest. It just makes you look like everybody else. Like when you use those particular words. Find a different original way to say things. Using cliches, that's not going to base the turkey in college, I made that up, it doesn't mean anything. But you can see the confusion that accompanies seeing a cliche you don't know, right? Base the turkey, like turkey tastes better if you do baste. Is that what he's like you're trying to like work it out? I've never heard of it before. So that it can just be confusing. Don't introduce new points or go off in new directions. I once had a guy where I asked him, I said, can I use your paper? Because he was in a hurry when he wrote the paper. And I said, can I use your paper as an example of like what not to do in papers? And he was like, yeah, I guess. I was like, okay. And because I had one time he said, okay, like, I'm okay with that. But the guy, like, I might end up showing you that paper this semester. It's really funny. But he, at the very end of the paper, like it's a paper about like do cell phones cause problems for society? And at the very end of the paper, he's all like, basically his reasons are, no, because sometimes people get distracted by them in class. It makes it easier for my girlfriend to catch me cheating. And then the very last sentence of the paper was, they also cause car wrecks. I was like, that's probably the only good reason you've had. Like, give me a whole paragraph about that. But instead, he like throws it at the very end, and I was like, I need like an explanation. I don't want new facts at the very end, because that's just shocking and like something you need to explain further. Don't end with an unnecessary announcement. Actually, in that paper where he was talking about how he cheats on his girlfriend, he now can get caught because of cell phones. He said he was basically implying that he doesn't know if she's cheating on him too. But he says, like at the end of the paper, just before that last sentence that I told you before, he said, "I'm gonna go look at my girl phone and see what I can find out." And I was like, why do I need to know that? Like, why do I need to know you're cheating on your girlfriend, so you're gonna go look at hers, see if you can catch her? Like, it's like almost like it's a victory. Like he's like, I'm gonna go look, and I was like, I don't understand. But it was really funny to me. So don't end with an unnecessary announcement, like, and also don't call attention to the fact that you've just written a paper. I was talking about like the other day like 2 days ago, how I don't want you to call attention to the fact that you're writing a paper. Don't say, in this paper I will, or in this paper you have learned. Don't talk about the paper within the paper. Just say the information. Constructing a formal outline, I've already kind of talked about that in the other one, but you can go back and review that if you want to. I'm going to go really fast through this stuff. So if you wanted to write it down, you could video and it's text. It's like literally gonna be super fast. So with the drafting, don't consider it a final draft. You know, every time because you're able to revise, you can just not have the pressure of this is my final draft. You know, turn in what you feel good about now, and then later if you're like, oh, actually now I've kind of changed my mind on some things, you can turn in another revision on your own. Then after I get feedback, you can revise it again. So never feel like the paper is permanent once you've written it. And that's the number one problem with revision that I have is I tell people they can revise, but once they've written the paper, they feel it's a permanent thing. Like they've just etched it in stone. But it's not. It's totally subject to change. It's in the digital world too. So it's not even like you have to write it down by hand. By the way, my suggestion is not to write down by hand because when you write something by hand, it makes it feel more permanent. Than be to write in some other way. So yeah, revising, start in like different, you can revise a whole bunch, you might end up revising nothing, you might throw out the whole paper, you might start from scratch, you might end up changing only a few words. The book has some pretty good tips. Give yourself a cooling off period after finishing your first draft, so don't try to revise it immediately. Like, stay away from it for a couple of days, you know, if you end up writing a paper multiple days in advance. Then go back to it a couple of days later and be like, oh wow, I was dumb. And you realize some of the mistakes that you made, like if you give yourself a couple days. It says revise on a hard copy, but I think on computers now, because it gives you the option to do comments, you know that? You can like add a comment or delete a comment. In Microsoft Word, it's Alt-I-M, or you can go to the review tab and then add a comment. You can later delete those comments. But you can give yourself a note like, oh, I need to say this clearer here or something. Reading your draft aloud, you'll notice obvious mistakes that you might not have noticed when you were reading it with your eyes, because you have to read every individual word and hear that word, and so it can help you catch mistakes you might not even notice. Take advantage of opportunities to get feedback, have friends read it, family, people in the class. Don't overwhelm yourself with changes and try to make them all at once. If you feel like, oh, Engl said to do this, 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 and this, I'll just try to do this first thing first and see if that works and how many points that gets me back. Don't feel pressure to do it all at once. Don't have an ego, like if I say do this, don't be like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, take the feedback into consideration and try to do it. And do it in stages and with a checklist, that way you don't get overwhelmed. When we do peer review later for the research paper, be kind when reading people's papers, don't just be like a jerk the whole time. And sample revising stuff, then we get to editing and proofreading, which I'll go through really fast. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I generally don't grade people very hard on like grammar, spelling. The only thing that I do is if I literally can't read what's being written because the grammar and spelling are so bad, that's when I'll end up. It's one of those things, a paper can be good with mistakes of that nature, but if I can't read it, then it's terrible. So just have somebody look over as much as you need to have them look over to get your grammar and spelling to a good point. But that's not the number one thing I'm looking for. So if you have somebody look at it and they start correcting your grammar and spelling, say, no, I want to know if I did the topic like he asked me to. Which that's going to annoy them because that's not something easy for them to look at. But that's the best thing you could ask them to do, not look at your grammar and spelling. Y'all have a good one.